Welcome to the Martial Arts Mind podcast.
We were going to talk today about jiu-jitsu for people that are over 40 years old or 40 and over, and how, some of the obstacles that people face as beginning practitioners in jiu-jitsu at 40 and over, and then some adjustments or modern fixes to some old problems that have traditionally plagued people who have been over 40.
Brian, I'm reminded of the story that you told me about how one of the brown belts at the academy that you're training at approached you and said that he had a coworker, in fact his boss, wanted to do jiu-jitsu, and he took him to another academy, and the guy didn't like the class, but our mutual friend had suggested that you do privates with him. I think that, and you and I were discussing how, the guy really isn't asking for private lessons.
Right, that's right.
He doesn't understand that there actually is a classroom environment that can provide him with a safe and sound way to learn and explore jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, traditionally that's been the answer. Like, if there is a problem in the group class, the solution is always a private lesson. And I think that's what this new guy, this guy who was new to jiu-jitsu was responding to. And I'm not even sure if he brought up the private lesson. It may have been that the guy who had brought him, who had some more experience in jiu-jitsu, was the one who had suggested it, because that's the standard solution. I think that's usually what people are gravitating towards, because it's a way of controlling the environment, of reducing some of the risks at the beginning of training. So especially for people who are beginning jiu-jitsu, if you're 40 or you're around 40 or older than 40, and you want to have a way of reducing some of the risks or the challenges, that's traditionally been the way to do it. You had posed this question: what if the environment was able to take care of someone like that?
Yeah, it brings up an interesting question for me outside of the box a little bit. I wonder if parents believed in the school system, like the public or private school system, would they homeschool so readily? Homeschooling works in a way, but there are some pitfalls, right? I've met a lot of children throughout the years that seem to be very smart and have a good sort of comprehensive intellect, but are socially just not acclimated very well. And I think the same thing with jiu-jitsu. The private lesson model has its positive points. Like, people have a large knowledge base, but in application they're a little bit. They seem a little bit stunted. And maybe I'm digressing a little bit, but for us, it's a bit of a tragedy, because the group environment, when it's a healthy one, provides the practitioner with all of the tools necessary for a profound experience.
There are soft skills that get learned in the classroom that don't get learned one-on-one. And I think on the other side of it is what you're saying. There are some technical things that can happen inside of a one-on-one lesson that might make it easier for a certain type of person to learn. But there are absolutely, when I think back to the experiences that I've had in training, that the group class provided a lot more variation of experience. And I think that the results were a deeper lesson beyond just the technique that I learned. There were some deeper lessons that were happening, whether it was socializing or being able to interact with other people, which I think is what you were saying. There were also challenges. I mean, that's not just an area where there are successes. There are also issues. You run into people who you don't necessarily get along with, or where there are circumstances where you're not so comfortable, and you have to be able to manage that.
The caveat, I think, here is that a student will go through that if you know that there's not a specter, sort of hanging over your head, meaning you're not going to get injured or embarrassed, you can go through that. But what I hear with this guy saying, like, private lessons is, like, the environment in a lot of schools is so unstable that, you know, they're not even willing to entertain the process. The other tragedy for me is that the private lesson model, if you're not a person of means, it excludes you. You actually don't have an access point. Whereas like if the group class, or when the group class is managed and maintained and I'll say protected, the doorway for the student to walk through is much wider. And that's where a lot of guys are really missing the point. They're so involved in this exclusionary mentality, whether on purpose or by default. Like if someone's sort of doing private lessons, you know, and believes in that method, they're edging a portion of the jiu-jitsu, you know, community or someone who wants to do jiu-jitsu out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even see it.
What I hear you saying is that the solution, or a solution to this, is not necessarily to eliminate private lessons, but rather to ask the environment, the group environment, to kind of catch up a little bit to the student's needs.
And if I could, I would have, you know, the entire world go green tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like you and I, if we could wave a magic wand, we would say, like, yeah, like, no more global pollution and, you know, no more ISIS or whatever, like all of these atrocities. And it's not reality. So, you know, I think from our perspective, or my perspective at least, like, it's not a realistic sort of request for the jiu-jitsu community to stop doing private lessons. But, like, a lot of people, I don't think, realize, like, they think because, you know, 500 people show up to watch the Worlds and another 300 competitors are there, that jiu-jitsu's huge and it's growing. And it's not. That's 1,000 people worldwide, you know, or 2,000 or 5,000. That's such a tiny number. And they don't realize that they're killing this beautiful thing in the name of I don't know what, competition or whatever environment keeps someone in their 40s who's definitely, I mean, I'm hyper aware of my physical well-being and also my emotional well-being. So, you know, I think you know, at least at this juncture, it's prudent for us to encourage and or promote a healthier class environment. At least I know at our schools, there is no such thing as a paid private lesson. You know, we're happy to do private lessons for people that have been out, you know, due to work or some family issue or something, and or a free private lesson for someone who's having trouble with the curriculum. You know, needs a little bit extra attention. But in our environment, the private lesson model, as it stands in the regular jiu-jitsu community, does not exist. You know, and it's because I think we believe in the group class so much. You know, you were talking, and I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, the group class doesn't give you one teacher; it gives you 100 teachers. It's just so much more to work with. You're approaching 40, and you're not beginning in jiu-jitsu. Like, you're known worldwide as you know, a top-notch practitioner. You know, like, when your name comes up in the jiu-jitsu circle, everybody is like, yeah, that guy is legit. And, you know, I think it's an interesting thing, like, as you approach 40 now, being inside of the thing, like, what are the pitfalls that you see for the practitioner, like, not at the beginning level, but now, like, going forward as a 40-year-old black belt?
Well, you know, I had that conversation with a group of fellows recently about this because, you know, I looked around. I was getting prepared for class to take the class, and I looked around and I realized that everybody who was sitting near me was 40 or over. And it struck me because I've been training alongside lots of these people since they were 30. So it was a little bit of it was a moment kind of where I was looking at everybody a little bit differently. We were talking about what it's like to be training regularly, and, people were variously, they weren't complaining, but, talking about the bumps and bruises that they were managing, the time, between their jobs and their families that they were managing now. And one of the things that we had talked about in that conversation was how important it is for practitioners, people who are training, to make sure that they're making adjustments in their practice and in their approach, their philosophical approach to what they're doing, in order to be able to manage what's to come. Because I think that the risk, the danger that I see is that at 42, 45, 40, 50, the people aren't actually going to be looking at where they are. They're going to be looking at where they were.
Yeah.
And being retrospective, there's a value to that, because you don't want to forget everything that's happened to you. But it's a challenge to be present, and then it's a challenge to kind of be in the present. I think that a lot of people who are practicing, especially if they've been practicing for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, they're practicing, or they're trying to practice 25-year-old jiu-jitsu in a 45-year-old body. And for some people, a few people can pull it off. There are a few people who can pull it off, but most people can't, I think. And it's important, even if you think that you're one of the people that is going to be able to pull it off, it's important to acknowledge that you're in this other place now. I think it's the only really responsible thing to do if you intend to continue to train, because the injuries and the issues that you incurred as a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old that you're able to bounce right back from, you may not be as quick to be able to bounce back from those. And if you intend to continue practicing daily or a few times a week, whether it's at kind of an intense pace or it's a more modified pace, if you intend to keep practicing, you have to adjust, because you're not going to be able to train anymore if you're injured and broken. I'm happy to say that conversation was not met with as much, scorn or derision as I expected.
Guys won't say that they're still playing with their G.I. Joe dolls and little army men. They won't readily admit that they're playing UFC.
Right.
But, I think you're spot on. It's such a pitfall to because the age is pivotal. You're moving into the next phase, and it's so hard to just let it go.
This was not a conversation and I think that our conversation today is not a conversation about watering down your practice as someone who is 40 or over, if you're someone who has been practicing. It is a conversation, or it is a suggestion or an idea that how you look at, or how you engage, or how you practice, or even what you put your attention on, it's got to shift. It doesn't mean you cannot be current. It doesn't mean you cannot be modern or be evolving or updating, but you have to. It's not the same thing anymore.
It's interesting because I and you are part of the first generation of Americans that will have practiced jiu-jitsu for 20 plus years and 30 years and 40 years. We'll be in our 40s, 50s, and 60s. And we're the first generation to do that in this country. And I think what you're saying is really it's not only relevant and accurate, but it's prudent. It's a responsible thing to say to the jiu-jitsu community, to the over 40 jiu-jitsu community coming in, and to the students or the practitioners that are moving into their 40s and been doing this 15, 20 years. It's just really, really important. And I think we can end on this to be present, and then what did you say? Stay present? Yeah, to be present and stay present. That's really the key to it. And then just really encourage the jiu-jitsu community at large to take a look at the classroom and make sure that you're not edging people out, edging people who need it, who need jiu-jitsu.